If I slide a puck and it keeps moving, you'll say inertia, but that word might be the laziest non-explanation in all of physics. Because notice what happens in your head. You see the puck glide, you feel satisfied, and you put a label on it. Inertia. Done. Mystery solved. But if I stop you right there and say, okay, why did it keep moving? You'll probably use the same word again. Because it has inertia. And that's not an explanation. That's a loop. It's like explaining why opium makes you sleepy by saying it has a dormitive virtue. You didn't learn anything new. You just renamed the thing you saw. So let's do a little experiment together. Try to explain this basic fact: an object keeps moving, without using the word inertia, not even once. What do you have left? At first you might say, because nothing is stopping it. Good, that's already better. But then the next question appears. What does nothing is stopping it actually mean? Nothing really? Not a single influence? No air? No friction, no gravity, no electromagnetic interactions from the table, no tug from the rest of the universe? When you say nothing, you're making a claim about a whole list of possible interactions, and physics is, in a way, the art of deciding which interactions matter and which ones are small enough to ignore. This is where the title's promise comes in. Your professor probably gave you a definition. Inertia is the tendency of an object to resist changes in its motion. That's not wrong, but it's like telling someone a joke and then explaining that it was a humorous statement intended to provoke laughter. True, but it misses the point. What inertia actually means, what it is doing in physics, is deeper than stubbornness. It's tied to how we define force, how we define motion, and even how we decide what it means for something to move in a straight line. And the first surprising thing, G, is this. Inertia is not a force. It's not a push inside objects that keeps them going. It's not a hidden engine. Inertia is what remains when you strip away forces. It's the baseline behavior you get when interactions don't exchange momentum with the object. That sentence might sound abstract, so let's pin it down with something you felt in your body. Think of a car at a red light. You're sitting there. Then the light turns green and the car accelerates forward. What do you feel? You feel pressed back into the seat. Most people describe that feeling as being thrown backward, as if some force yanked you toward the rear. But if you look closely, what's actually happening is that the seat is pushing you forward, and your body is reluctantly accepting that push. Your body wasn't trying to go backward. Your body was trying to keep doing what it was already doing, having the same velocity it had a moment ago, 0, relative to the ground. The car changes velocity. Your body changes velocity only because the seat forces it to. Now notice the subtlety. The sensation you feel, being pressed into the seat, is not motion. It's acceleration. It's the seat applying a force to change your motion. If the car were moving smoothly at a constant speed on a perfectly straight road, you'd feel almost nothing. Even if you're flying down the highway at 100 kilometers per hour, you can sip coffee. The moment the car accelerates, you feel it. That's already a clue. Inertia has to do with resisting acceleration, not resisting velocity. Velocity doesn't feel like anything. Acceleration feels like a shove. Here's a fun way to make that concrete. Your phone has an accelerometer. That little chip can tell the difference between moving at a steady speed and being pushed. If you slide your phone across a table at roughly constant speed, the accelerometer doesn't scream, "I'm moving." It stays calm. But if you jerk it, or if it hits something, it registers a spike. The phone is basically saying, "I don't detect motion. I detect forces that cause acceleration." So inertia, at its most honest, is about how an object responds when forces try to change its motion. But that still leaves the question, what is inertia, really? Is it a property inside matter? Is it connected to mass? Is it some kind of preference for motion? Let's do what good physics does. Let's go back to an ideal world first. Not because the real world is like that, but because if you can't think clearly in an ideal world, you won't think clearly in the messy one. Imagine a hockey puck on perfectly smooth ice. Not pretty smooth. Perfectly smooth, no friction at all, no air resistance, no little bumps. You give it a shove. What happens? In your everyday life, everything slows down. A rolling ball stops. A sliding book comes to rest. It's so common that it starts to feel like a law of nature. Motion dies. Rest is natural. Motion needs to be maintained. That idea is ancient. Aristotle thought something like it. You push, it moves. Stop pushing, it stops. Seems reasonable. But the key discovery, one of the most impulsive mental flips in the history of science, is that this everyday behavior is mostly not about motion at all. It's about friction. It's about interactions. The reason your book stops sliding is not because it ran out of motion. It's because the table and the book are in contact. And that contact is a giant factory for converting kinetic energy into thermal energy. The molecules at the surfaces are snagging, vibrating, colliding. Momentum gets exchanged with the earth. If you could take that away, the object wouldn't stop. Not because it's magically powered, because there's no mechanism left to change its momentum. Now, the way Galileo approached this, long before anyone had fancy sensors or rockets, was to use imagination as a scientific instrument. He looked at balls rolling down and up inclines. If you roll a ball down one ramp and up another, it climbs to almost the same height. The smoother you make the surfaces, the closer it gets. Then you ask, what if the second ramp is less steep? The ball has to travel farther to reach the same height. And if you make it flatter and flatter, it travels farther and farther. Push this idea to the limit. If the second ramp were perfectly flat and frictionless, how far would it go before reaching the same height? It can't climb. There's no height to gain. So to stay consistent with the pattern, it would have to go forever. That's inertia in its first historical appearance. Motion doesn't need a cause. Change of motion does. But now we hit the tricky part. The law of inertia is often stated like this. An object in motion remains in motion at constant velocity in a straight line unless acted upon by a net external force. And that sentence hides two loaded phrases, constant velocity and straight line. Constant relative to what? Straight according to which ruler? Who gets to decide what counts as straight? This is where professors often move fast, because it sounds like philosophical nitpicking, but it's not. It's the heart of what inertia actually means. Because to say it moves in a straight line at constant speed is not just about the object. It's about the coordinate system you're using. It's about the reference frame. Let's do a thought experiment. You're inside a spaceship with no windows, no stars, no outside view, just you, a floating ball, and maybe a little air to breathe. You let the ball go. It floats. You nudge it. It drifts across the room at a steady speed. It hits the wall, bounces, and drifts back. Inside this ship, the ball obeys the law of inertia beautifully. If you don't push it, it moves at constant velocity. If you push it, it accelerates. Now here's the question. How do you know your ship is really moving? Maybe you're coasting through space at 1,000,000 miles per hour. Maybe you're perfectly at rest. How would you tell? If the ship is moving at constant velocity, no acceleration, then every experiment you do inside gives the same results either way. You cannot detect constant velocity by internal experiments alone. This is not just a cool idea. It's a cornerstone of physics. The laws of physics in a uniformly moving frame look the same as in a stat P ionary frame. Now imagine a different situation. Same windowless ship, but now the ship's engine turns on and the ship accelerates. What happens to the floating ball? From your perspective inside the ship, the ball seems to drift backward. It looks like some mysterious force is pulling it toward the rear. But from an outside inertial frame, say an observer drifting nearby, the story is simple. The ball continues with its previous velocity and the ship accelerates forward underneath it. The ship catches up to the ball differently over time. So inside the accelerating ship, you are tempted to invent a new force, a backward force that acts on everything. You might call it an inertial force. You might say it's because of inertia. And in practice, that's what we do in engineering. We talk about fictitious forces in non-inertial frames like centrifugal force and the force that throws you back in a car. But here's the secret move. Those forces aren't really out there in the same way gravity or electromagnetism is. They appear because you chose a frame that is accelerating, and you insisted on treating it as if Newton's laws should work without modification. The price you pay is that you must add fake forces to make the equations balance. Now pause and appreciate how weird this is. Inertia isn't just about objects resisting change. It's also about your choice of viewpoint. It's about which observers get a clean physics where forces correspond to interactions and which observers have to invent extra forces just to account for their own acceleration. That leads to a powerful reframing. Newton's first law is not merely a law about objects. It's a definition of inertial frames. An inertial frame is one where a free object, an object not interacting significantly with anything, moves in a straight line at constant speed. That's almost circular, and that's okay. Physics sometimes works like that. You don't start with definitions carved into stone. You start with patterns in nature and build consistent concepts. So inertia is the principle that there exist frames, special states of motion, where free objects move uniformly. And once you accept that, the entire structure of Newtonian mechanics becomes possible. Now let's bring this down to earth with something you can picture. Think about stirring a bowl of soup and then stopping the spoon. The soup keeps swirling for a while. At first glance, you might say, inertia keeps it moving. Fine. But watch what happens if you now rotate the bowl itself. If you spin the bowl steadily, the soup surface becomes slightly curved. If you've ever seen water in a spinning bucket, the surface forms a parabola, higher at the edges. In the rotating frame of the bucket, you can pretend there's a centrifugal force pushing outward, balancing gravity to make that shape. But if you step outside the rotating frame, there's no outward force. The water wants to move in straight lines. The bucket walls push it inward, continuously bending its path into a circle. That bending requires acceleration. Acceleration requires force. The walls provide that. The curved surface is the water arm ranging itself so that the pressure gradient provides the required inward force for circular motion. So what looked like a mysterious outward force is actually a bookkeeping trick. In the rotating frame, you invent centrifugal force so you can keep using Newton's laws as if the frame were inertial. This is why I called inertia a sorting rule. It sorts your experiences into two categories. Category 1, motion that looks simple, constant velocity, when no interactions act. Category 2, motion that looks weird. Things fall outward, you feel pushed back, because you are in a non-inertial frame. Now, once we accept inertia as a principle tied to inertial frames, we can ask the next natural question: how strong is it? How do we measure it? This is where mass enters, and where many students carry a quiet confusion for years. In everyday speech, mass is how much stuff. But in physics, the role mass plays in dynamics is it measures inertia. It tells you how much an object accelerates when you apply a given force. Push a shopping cart gently. It accelerates. Load it with heavy groceries. Same push, smaller acceleration. You feel the difference immediately. That feeling in your arms is not weight, it's inertia. Weight is a force, gravity pulling. Inertia is resistance to acceleration, how hard it is to change the velocity. On Earth, heavier things usually have more mass, so weight and inertia rise together and our intuition mixes them. But the moment you imagine the same object on the moon, the confusion becomes obvious. Take a brick. On Earth, it's heavy and it's hard to accelerate. On the moon, it's much less heavy. It weighs less because gravity is weaker, but it is just as hard to accelerate. Its inertia is unchanged. It still has the same mass. That separation is crucial. If you think inertia is how heavy it feels, you'll miss what the physics is doing. So in Newton's second law, force equals mass times acceleration, mass is the measure of inertia. It's literally the number that tells you how stubbornly the object resists acceleration. But this brings us to another reveal. Many people think the story ends there. Inertia is mass. Done. Yet the title says what inertia actually means. And there is one more layer that most introductory teaching doesn't emphasize, because it sits at the border between Newtonian and modern physics. Inertia is not only about amount of matter, it's about energy. Here's the weird-sounding claim. If you heat a brick, you increase its inertia. Not by enough for you to notice with your hands, not by enough to matter in carpentry, but by a real, measurable amount. Why would that be true? Because when you heat a brick, you increase the internal energy of its molecules. They vibrate more vigorously. That energy is part of the brick's total energy, and in relativity, energy and mass are connected. The object's resistance to acceleration, the thing we call inertia, tracks its total energy content. Now let's be careful. We're not going to do a bunch of equations here. The point is not to impress you with symbols. The point is to refine the meaning. In Newtonian mechanics, we treat mass as an intrinsic property of matter, and we treat it as constant. That works extremely well for everyday speeds and energies. But modern physics tells us mass is one way of talking about energy. The inertia of a system depends on the total energy, including internal energy and even the energy stored in fields and binding. That means inertia is not a mysterious essence of matter. It is a property of energy and momentum in space-time. Even in Newtonian terms, you can glimpse this. When an object is moving, it has momentum. To change that momentum, you need an impulse, force applied over time. More momentum, more impulse required. That's a kind of inertia connected to motion itself. But relativity takes that idea and makes it more fundamental. Energy and momentum are part of one combined thing, and inertia is the resistance of that energy momentum to being changed by forces. So now let's step back and tie the threads together. We started with the word inertia and noticed it can be used as a fake explanation. Then we rebuilt it from observation. Objects don't stop moving unless interactions exchange momentum with them. We saw that friction hides this principle in daily life. Then we discovered the deeper layer. Inertia is bound up with the idea of inertial frames, special frames where free objects move uniformly. Then we quantified inertia with mass, separating it from weight. And finally, we extended the meaning. Inertia is not just stuffiness of matter, but a reflection of energy in modern physics. So what is inertia actually? Here's the honest answer. Inertia is the rule that in the right frames, the natural state of motion is uniform motion. And the thing we measure as mass is how strongly an object's momentum changes when forces act. Inertia is not a cause of motion. It is the absence of a cause of change. It's also a statement about the structure of the universe, that there exist frames where the laws take a simple form, and that in those frames, force corresponds to interaction, not to your own acceleration. And that's why your professor never revealed might feel true, because the common classroom approach makes inertia sound like a property inside objects, when it is equally a property of the way we describe motion and define reference frames. Now let's make it personal again with the car. The next time you take a sharp turn and you feel yourself thrown toward the door, don't think of a mysterious outward force pulling you. Think, my body wants to go straight. The car is forcing me to curve. The door provides the sideways force. If the door weren't there, you would continue in a straight line while the car turns away from you. And if you want to test whether you are in an inertial frame, don't look for motion. Look for felt acceleration. Look for forces that appear out of nowhere. Look for the need to invent fictitious forces to make Newton's laws work. That feeling of being shoved, that's your body reporting that you are not in an inertial frame. So inertia isn't just a chapter in mechanics. It's a lens. It's the idea that lets you separate what the universe is doing from what your coordinate system is doing. And the best part is that you can walk around with this lens every day. Every time something slides, every time you brake, every time you spin in a chair and feel your inner ear complain, you can ask the most Feynman-like question of all, what is actually pushing what? Because that question, more than any vocabulary word, is what inertia is really for.